There's something terrifying about finding a creature perfectly preserved in ice, almost like it's just waiting to wake up. For centuries, Earth has been keeping secrets buried beneath frozen wastelands. But as glaciers melt and ancient ice cracks open, some of those secrets are being exposed, and what's been found isn't always natural. From giant beasts with no place in evolutionary timeline to strange humanoid figures trapped in permafrost, these real discoveries are disturbing, unexplained, and in some cases downright horrifying. Let's count down the most disturbing creatures ever discovered frozen in ice for centuries. In 2015, Russian scientists made a discovery that stunned the world. 2 lion cubs perfectly preserved in the Siberian permafrost. But they weren't your typical lions. These cubs belonged to a long-extinct species known as the cave lion, which roamed Ice Age Eurasia. What made the discovery creepy was how well preserved they were. Skin, fur, internal organs, completely intact. One even had whiskers. Even more chilling, their sharp baby teeth suggested they were predators in the making, and possibly a warning of what else is still buried in the ice. In 2018, scientists drilling beneath Antarctica's ice shelf got more than they bargained for. They were expecting bacteria, but instead they found tiny, wiggling marine worms still alive, trapped for thousands of years in freezing dark waters beneath 2,400 feet of solid ice. Nicknamed zombie worms, these creatures had no eyes and survived off the bones of dead whales. The weirdest part? When brought to the surface, they were still alive. It was like something had kept them on pause until we hit play. Imagine coming face to face with a 9,000-year-old beast that looked like it died just yesterday. In 2011, a mummified bison was pulled from Siberia's Yukon region. Unlike other fossilized finds, this thing was soft, with muscles, internal organs, and even blood vessels still visible. Scientists say it's the best preserved example of its kind ever found, but here's what freaked everyone out. It was in a perfect defensive posture, legs tucked under its body as if it saw death coming and braced for impact. In the Altai Mountains of Mongolia, archaeologists stumbled onto what looked like a human, but wasn't quite. In 2016, they uncovered the remains of a woman buried in ice for over 1,500 years. But something was off. Her body was covered in thick clothing made of felt and fur, but her hands were unusually long, and her feet were wrapped in strange leather boots that resembled hooves. Even more bizarre, locals believe the area was cursed, warning that, quote, demons guarded the body. The mummy's face had been partially frozen and disfigured, giving her a non-human, almost cryptid-like appearance. In 2007, a Japanese fishing vessel hauled up a deep-sea nightmare that had been flash frozen by Antarctic currents. What they found was a giant squid over 33 feet long, preserved in near-perfect condition. While that sounds impressive, what disturbed scientists was the state of its flesh. Bruised, slashed, and twisted as if it had been in a violent underwater battle. Some marine biologists even suggested it may have been attacked by something bigger, something we still haven't discovered. The carcass was frozen within minutes, locking it in a final, twisted pose. Under Greenland's ice sits a forgotten nuclear reactor and thousands of gallons of toxic waste, thawing faster than anyone predicted. Built in 1959, Camp Century was a US Army research base powered by a small nuclear reactor. When the military abandoned it in 1967, they left behind diesel, sewage, low-level radioactive coolant, and pieces of the reactor itself, assuming eternal ice would lock everything away. A 2016 climate study warned that by the end of this century, meltwater could breach the site, flushing PCBs and radiation straight into the Arctic Ocean. The base may force the first international cleanup of a facility that was supposed to stay frozen forever. What if every spring thaw dribbled banned pesticide into the ocean, like a slow IV drip straight into the food chain? A 2008 Antarctic study found that layers of ice from the 1960s and 70s, peak DDT usage years, are now melting into coastal waters. DDT DDT is the short form for a pesticide with an insane name. Scientists measured concentrations of the pesticide in krill, fish, and even in penguin fat. Because DDT binds well to cold surfaces, glaciers act like chemical sponges, preserving toxins that the world outlawed decades ago. As climate change accelerates, that frozen reservoir is dissolving, ensuring the ghosts of industrial chemistry haunt ecosystems that never used the stuff in the first place. A melting ice patch in Norway suddenly littered the ground with 1,700-year-old shoes, mittens, and horse bones, like somebody tripped over history's lost and found bin. The Lendbreen ice patch was a forgotten mountain pass until archaeologists noticed artifacts popping out of the receding ice in 2011. Over the next decade, they recovered more than 1,000 objects, everything from a perfectly woven wool tunic to an iron bridle. Radiocarbon dating shows the trail was busiest during the Roman Iron Age, suggesting bustling trade where we once assumed only wilderness. The site proves that climate change is rewriting maps, but also rewriting history textbooks, one thawed shoe at a time. Scientists drilled into ancient cave ice hoping to find harmless microbes and pulled up bacteria already resistant to modern antibiotics. In 2020, researchers analyzing ice cores from a cave in Romania isolated 68 bacterial strains locked away since the late glacial period. Alarmingly, several carried genes that shrug off the common drugs today. These microbes evolved resistance long before humans invented penicillin, suggesting that antibiotic-defying genes have deep evolutionary roots. The big worry here? Thawing ice could let ancient bacteria mingle with today's pathogens, potentially swapping survival tricks and accelerating the antibiotic resistance crisis. On Everest's north face, climbers discovered a single leather boot still on a human foot belonging to a mountaineer missing since 1924. British climbers George Mallory and Sandy Irving disappeared near the summit nearly 30 years before Hillary's historic ascent. Mallory's body surfaced in 1999, but Irving's location remained unsolved. In 2024, a documentary crew filming melting glaciers spotted a boot with initials stitched inside, still containing a foot. DNA tests are underway, but if confirmed, the find could change Everest lore forever, and maybe even prove that Irvine reached the top first. Either way, the mountain is literally giving up its dead as its icy shroud retreats.
Up first is the cracked cap. A massive piece of Greenland's ice cap just broke off from the ice sheet, and researchers are seriously concerned. The glacier is some 110 square kilometers in size, making it one of the most significant single losses of ice mass in Arctic history. To scientists, ecologists, and people who care about having an environment to live in, this is often considered pretty bad. But nations around the world and the corporations within them are seeing nothing but dollar signs. See, unlike the Antarctic, the Arctic is not a single impassable continent. It's an ice cap stretching down over several archipelagos and landmasses. For centuries, the Arctic has been nigh on impassable, as the ice is simply too thick and dangerous. But as the ice melts and the equator becomes unbearably hot, this ice will open up all sorts of new passageways through the Arctic. Claims over Arctic waterways are already being heavily sought as America, Russia, Canada, Norway, Denmark, and Finland jockey for position over who gets to control these potentially highly profitable trade routes. Next is the oldest DNA. A group of Danish researchers in Greenland made an incredible discovery, finding the oldest DNA ever. This fleck of genetic material was determined to be 2 million years old. That outstrips the previously oldest known DNA by 1 million years. The known history of life stretches back hundreds of millions of years, but only fossils, no DNA, can be recovered from that far back. This isn't just some shred of DNA either, but an actual readable genetic code, giving unparalleled insight into ancient biology. The researchers went into an area of Greenland where they were surrounded by 2 million million-year-old mounds of dirt, and then began taking core samples. There were no fossils or remnants of bone, but by testing the soil, they were able to identify some actual strands of DNA. The special factor in Greenland, which allows DNA to survive for so long, are both the cold and minerals in the soil, which actually bind to the DNA and help to preserve it within the soil. It's unknown exactly where this DNA came from, but likely from one of any number of sources, as living creatures are shedding DNA constantly. Some of this, likely from excrement, was preserved inside the soil for 2 million years to eventually be discovered by these Danish researchers. Next is the microcontinent. It's estimated only 5% of the ocean has been observed, but that number is rapidly growing as scientists continue mapping the seafloor and making new discoveries. For instance, it was just recently discovered that there is in fact a microcontinent between Greenland and Canada, as a result of Greenland and Canada splitting apart, leading to the formation of the Davis Strait. This microcontinent began to be formed from the left-behind tectonic plate, now known as the Davis Strait microcontinent. This seems to indicate that tectonic plates are not solid masses, but can in fact fuse, split, and calve to form entirely new continents. Now, this isn't quite a full continent, in fact it's still a proto-microcontinent, but in another few million years this could very well become its own independent tectonic plate, influencing our world in as of yet unknown ways. Now, we won't be around to see it, and the formation has already been ongoing for 30 to 60 million years, but it is fascinating to understand that the world around us is continuing to change, that there is no end of history, and even if we're all gone, the fascinating tectonic movements of plates will continue on the Earth's crust.
You'd think 42,000 years would be long enough for a creature to disappear from memory. Not this one. In 2007, Russian scientists discovered a female woolly mammoth calf named Lyuba in the frozen Yamal Peninsula. What made her special wasn't just the condition, she was almost perfectly preserved with eyelashes and internal organs, but here's the creepy part. Her stomach still contained her mother's milk. Scientists believe she suffocated in mud, then froze so quickly that her last meal never had time to digest, like she was just flash frozen right there in time. In the 1950s, a monastery in Nepal claimed to have part of a Yeti hidden away, preserved in ice for generations. I don't know about you, but when I think of a Yeti, I always think of the Yeti from Monsters Inc. Snow cone? When explorer Peter Byrne visited the Pangbosh Monastery in 1959, he managed to smuggle part of the mummified Yeti hand out to the west. It was large, leathery, and completely unlike a human or an ape. DNA tests later said it was human, but experts were definitely skeptical. Some believed the tests were rigged to just shut the case down and get everybody to stay quiet, and miraculously the hand disappeared shortly after being analyzed, and the rest of the Yeti remains were reportedly stolen, adding even more mystery to the creature's icy legend. What do you guys think? Yeti, real creature, or just the stuff of legends? In 2021, a Siberian team unearthed what looked like a deformed canine in the ice, only to realize that it actually had two skulls. At first glance, they thought it was just a twisted pose caused by decay, but CT scans actually confirmed the creature had two heads, two spines, and a single set of ribs. It was believed to be a rare Ice Age mutation, possibly caused by environmental stress or even possibly inbreeding. But here's where things get even crazier. The second head was fully formed with sharp teeth and all. Some researchers feared this wasn't a natural deformity, but evidence of ancient genetic experimentation gone wrong. Beneath the Antarctic ice, scientists discovered a fish so strange it shouldn't even be alive. Meet the crocodile ice fish, which has no red blood cells and clear, antifreeze-like blood. These fish live in sub-zero temperatures where most animals would freeze solid in seconds. But here's the weirdest part. They evolved this way over millions of years and were found frozen in suspended animation, only to wake up when scientists revived them in lab tanks. The creatures looked alien, with bone-white bodies and hollow eyes, sparking debate over whether life on Earth even really started here. In 2019, a disturbing creature washed up near Casey Station in East Antarctica. Part seal, part something else. The carcass was bloated with blackened eyes and an unnaturally elongated jaw. Researchers said it looked like a mutated leopard seal, but its teeth didn't match. Some speculated deep-sea radiation exposure, others whispered about secret Antarctic labs, and when locals who saw the thing up close started getting sick, the body was whisked away by a government team and never seen again. What was it? Well, no one knows, but it left behind a trail of dead fish and unanswered questions.
In 2007 and 2008, two baby mammoths, later named Lyuba and Chroma, were found in Siberia. They were so well preserved that researchers were able to piece together how they died, even though both calves, one about 1 month old and the other 2 months old, died more than 40,000 years ago. Scientists used CT scans to find that the two mammoths probably choked on mud after falling into water. Daniel Fisher, a co-author of the study, stated the mud was like a really thick batter that they got clogged in their trachea and they were unable to dislodge by coughing. Basically preserved them from taking another breath. Lyuba and the 1 month old calf was discovered by a reindeer herder. Chroma was found in 2008, frozen upright in permafrost. Scavengers had eaten parts of her heart, lungs, and skull. But both mummies still showed a neonatal line on their teeth, a marker of stress during birth, which helped scientists estimate their ages. CT scans of Lyuba showed signs of what's called a mammalian dive reflex, showing that she fell through the ice into a muddy lake where she tried to clear the mud from her airways but eventually suffocated. Chroma, who had a belly full of breast milk, also had mud in her trachea, but her death is a bit less cut and dry. But according to researchers, it's possible she fell into a river, broke her back, and was then buried in mud while trying to escape. In 2015, scientists in Siberia discovered a baby woolly rhino, perfectly preserved in a frozen riverbank. Nicknamed Sasha after the man who found it, the rhino calf is the most complete specimen of its kind ever discovered. Sasha lived around 10,000 years ago, was about 1.5 meters long, or almost 5 feet, and 0.8 meters high, about 2.6 feet, much smaller than the fully grown adults, which could reach up to 15 feet long. According to Albert Protopopov from the Yakutian Academy of Sciences, baby woolly rhinos are incredibly rare to find, so this was a pretty amazing discovery, especially because it helps researchers learn more about the early life of these animals, which they didn't really know much about before. Woolly rhinos went extinct around 10,000 years ago. Climate change and habitat loss likely led to their extinction, but some scientists also think overhunting may have been a part of it. Around 30,000 years ago in Siberia, a tiny cave lion cub was making its way across the tundra when a sudden mudslide or crack in the permafrost caused the cub to fall and get trapped. The cub was buried in ice, preserving her fur, skin, and organs in almost perfect condition. This poor cub, later named Sparta, was discovered by mammoth tusk hunters in 2017, poking out of the melting permafrost in Yakutia, Siberia. Sparta is probably the best preserved Ice Age animal ever found, said Love Dallin, one of the study's co-authors, going on to say that even her whiskers were preserved. Sparta died about 28,000 years ago, and she was actually found alongside another cub named Boris, who was even older, dying around 43,000 years ago. Both cubs were about 1 to 2 months old when they died, with their sharp teeth just starting to emerge. Cave lions were closely related to modern African lions and lived across the northern hemisphere during the Ice Age. Unlike today's lions, though, these were, of course, adapted to freezing cold weather. In 2020, a perfectly preserved bear mummy was discovered in the Siberian permafrost. Siberia again. But anyway, it wasn't quite what scientists expected. At first, researchers thought they'd found the remains of a giant extinct cave bear, but eventually they realized the bear was much younger and from a completely different species. The bear was found by reindeer herders on a remote island in the East Siberian Sea. It was so well preserved that scientists could still see its skin, fur, claws, teeth, nose, internal organs, and even body fat. The remains were named the Etherican bear after a nearby river. At first, researchers at the Lazarev Mammoth Museum believed the bear was a cave bear, a massive species that went extinct about 22,000 years ago, but this bear was only about 3,460 years old. Turned out to be a young female brown bear standing just over 5 feet tall and weighing around 172 pounds. It was probably around 2 to 3 years old when it died. The bear's stomach contents revealed it had been eating plants and birds, with feathers still found inside its belly, which is incredible when you think about it. It also had signs of spinal injuries, which may have contributed to its death. In 2016, a gold miner in Yukon, Canada discovered something frozen in the ice. It turned out to be an ancient wolf pup, which had been almost perfectly preserved for 57,000 years. The mummified gray wolf, known as Zur, was found in the Klondike gold fields near Dawson City. Lead researcher Julie Machin, an anatomy professor, called it, quote, the most complete wolf specimen ever found from the Ice Age, going on to say all her soft tissue, her hair, her skin, even her little nose is still there. She's just complete, and that is really rare. Using radiocarbon dating and DNA analysis, scientists confirmed Zur died at just 7 weeks old. The remains were especially important because they were discovered in North America, unlike most finds in Siberia, as you've seen from this list, which are harder to access. Machen and her team were able to link Zur's DNA to both ancient Beringian wolves from Yukon and Russian grey wolves, which means that ancient wolves from North America and Eurasia mixed. Zur's remains also showed them what Ice Age wolves ate. The assumption had always been that they mostly ate bison or oxen, but as it turned out, this wolf mostly consumed aquatic animals, much like modern wolves in Alaska.
Next are new Greenland bears. Researchers were tasked with conducting a census and analysis of the polar bear population of Greenland, a population that is increasingly under threat. They would discover something totally different from their expectations though. Instead of the assumed single amorphous population covering the entire eastern coastline, it actually turns out there are two distinct and discrete polar bear populations in Greenland. The northeastern population has always been the most studied and most observed, as they're closest to human settlements, and it was assumed that they were emblematic of bears everywhere on the landmass, but this is not so. There's a southeastern population of bears that live among the mountainous and dangerous fjords in the south. This area is highly remote and heavily isolated, with no human habitation existing in the area, which of course made investigation and research quite difficult, but not impossible. So researchers spent several months tracking and even tagging polar bears in this harsh environment. Shockingly, there were quite high densities of polar bears in the fjords, something which truly surprised the researchers, as they did not expect such a healthy and robust population. After years of study, it was eventually observed that these bears hunted differently than the others, and almost never actually went out onto the sea ice, the traditional hunting ground of polar bears. This is because their sea ice is simply so fragmented and dangerous that it's no longer a viable environment for them to hunt within. These bears are a distinct population and likely haven't genetically mingled with the northern population for well over 200 years. Given enough time, these bears could well become their very own species. Next is the ice melange. Ice melt is a concerning trend in the world's climate, as melting ice raises sea levels and releases even more CO2, worsening the greenhouse effect and impacting ocean currents as well as coastlines and ecosystems throughout the world. But scientists just discovered a rather concerning addition to the threat. It turns out significantly more Arctic ice sheet, especially around Greenland, has melted than we thought. In fact, it's shed about a fifth more of its ice mass in the last 4 decades than scientists thought it had. This is seriously concerning, as it seems to indicate the issue is already significantly worse than we had believed, and we believed it to be near catastrophic already. Many are saying the Arctic ice sheet is now beyond saving, and the best we can hope for is to mitigate the potential devastation and hold on for the ride. Of 207 glaciers studied in the report, 179 of them experienced a significant reduction in size since 1985. Most of this ice loss actually comes from below the water level, where it's harder to track and where warm water currents can carve up the glacier. The rate of glacier calving from the ice sheet has also increased significantly. And finally is an ancient tundra. Researchers researchers spent weeks making their way to a buried mountain, then proceeded to carve through 2 miles of ice sheet before getting down to the dirt below. Once they got there, they were stunned to discover several fascinating fossils from a bygone age where the ice sheet around Greenland had actually melted and exposed the soil beneath, leading to a flourishing tundra ecosystem. But as the ancient ice melted, it also raised the sea level, meaning only the tallest points of Greenland were left above water, making it almost a sort of archipelago. They found some fossilized mosses and other fungi, as well as Arctic willow, but even more interestingly, they discovered an insect's leg and a compound eye, giving an excellent view into the small creatures in the ancient Greenland landmass. However, this has raised a lot of fears that a similar melting of the ice could lead to the same ecosystem. Now, to be fair, in 2,000 years, the ecosystem would recover and diversify beautifully, but that doesn't really make the people living along the coastline feel any better about losing their homes.
In 2006, scientists made an extraordinary discovery at White Sands National Park in New Mexico. While walking along the park's gypsum dunes, they noticed these dark spots in the ground that looked like footprints. Not all that incredible on its own, but these were not just footprints. They actually turned out to be fossilized tracks left behind by animals and humans during the Ice Age. Over the next few years, there were excavations, and they found that there were animal footprints from animals like Harlan's ground sloth, which were these massive 10-foot sloths that weighed over a ton. They also found dire wolf prints, which were a species of large prehistoric canine, and then there were the human footprints. They were found in layers of sediment that had been preserved for thousands of years, and what's really cool is that this meant humans had been in North America much earlier than we previously thought. Radiocarbon dating showed that the human tracks were at least 22,000 years old. Before this, the belief was that humans only arrived about 13,000 to 16,000 years ago. In 2018, researchers discovered a set of footprints from a woman walking with a child. The tracks show her walking for almost a mile, occasionally carrying the youngster and then setting them down as they went. And there were other amazing prints as well. One set showed what looked like humans having stalked a giant sloth. It's just cool that they were able to form such specific scenes out of these prints. Helps us imagine what their daily lives might have been like. Just last year, a baby woolly mammoth named Yana was discovered in Siberia. This mammoth had been frozen in permafrost for 50,000 years, and her remains are the best preserved mammoth ever found. Yana was only about 6 months old when she died, and the preservation is incredible. Parts of her fur, skin, and trunk are still intact, and that's because the permafrost in Siberia acts like a giant freezer, preserving animals and plants that have been trapped in the ice even for thousands and thousands of years. And in more recent years, as more and more ice has been melting, discoveries like Yana are happening more often. What makes Yana so important, though, is that studying her can tell us a lot about how mammoths lived. They're able to learn about the cold environment she lived in based on her skin and fur, and her age means she most likely depended on her mother and other herd members to survive. A lot of mammoth remains are damaged or they're just incomplete, but Yana is giving scientists a chance to study a young mammoth in a lot more detail. Also in 2024, scientists made a huge breakthrough when they sequenced the genome of another woolly mammoth found in Siberia. This one had been frozen for 52,000 years. By sequencing the genome, they were able to form this kind of map of the mammoth's genetic makeup. And this is important because it opens the door to understanding the biology of woolly mammoths in a way that's never been possible before. The mammoth's DNA reveals a lot about how these ancient creatures were built, how they adapted to life in the freezing cold. For example, scientists can now see how the woolly mammoth's fur and fat layers were genetically programmed to survive the cold. And even crazier, this could help in de-extincting the woolly mammoth, basically using its DNA to bring it back. Scientists are trying to use the genetic code to potentially create woolly mammoths through things like cloning or genetic engineering. Yeah, this is actually becoming a real possibility now. Being able to study the mammoth's genome is also helping scientists learn more about how mammoths went extinct. By comparing mammoth DNA to modern elephants, researchers can track the genetic changes that happened over thousands of years and figure out why the furry guys disappeared. Next up is the discovery of Kennewick Man in 1996, a set of human remains found along the Columbia River in Washington. The remains were estimated to be over 9,000 years old. At first they thought the remains came from a member of a Native American tribe. There was a huge debate at the time. Native American tribes immediately claimed they were the bones of their ancestors and wanted them to be returned so they could bury them properly. On the other hand, scientists wanted to study the remains to learn more about early human migration. Well, in the end, the remains were studied further, and there were some fascinating findings. Genetic tests revealed that Kennewick Man's DNA was actually most closely related to people from the Pacific Rim, especially Japan. This was a bit of a curveball. The traditional theory was that the first settlers of the Americas came from Siberia across the Bering Land Bridge. Now it looked like they might have come from a completely different area. In 1916, a pretty controversial discovery was made in Vero Beach, Florida. Human bones were found buried alongside the remains of massive Ice Age animals like mastodons and mammoths. You can only imagine how blown away people would have been back in the day learning about this. The fact that human bones were mixed in with fossils of giant creatures painted this very wild picture. And the fact that humans were living alongside these ancient prehistoric beasts. The bones were radiocarbon dated to around 14,000 years old, which pushed the timeline of human arrival in the Americas back further than most experts were thinking at the time, and some people were pretty skeptical. Was this an authentic find or was it a hoax? Well, with the advancement of new testing techniques, it was later confirmed that the remains were indeed human. The discovery became a huge piece of evidence that humans lived at the same time as giant animals, much earlier than people thought, which only opened up other theories about how ancient humans spread across the continent. In 2011, members of a tribe in northern Siberia found the remains of a steppe bison, perfectly preserved after being frozen for nearly 10,000 years. The bison was transported to the Yukon Academy of Sciences, where scientists began to study it. Unlike other bison mummies discovered over the years, this one was almost entirely intact, with its internal organs in remarkable condition. Olga Potapova, collections curator at the Mammoth site of Hot Springs, explained that while bison mummies are not uncommon, they're usually incomplete, saying, quote, "Normally what you find with mummies of megafauna is partial carcasses, but this mummy was preserved so well that it earned a record for the level of its preservation." The bison, which was probably about 4 years old when it died, looked like it had starved to death. There was no fat around its abdomen, but its heart and digestive systems were pretty intact, even though some organs had shrunk over time. Researchers even managed to extract tissue samples from each organ, and for the first time ever, they found steppe bison brain tissue still preserved. In 2022, a nearly perfectly mummified baby woolly mammoth was discovered by a miner in the permafrost of Canada's Klondike goldfields, dating back around 30,000 years. The calf, thought to be around 1 month old when it died, was a female and measured just 4.5 feet long. Researchers described it as the most complete mummified mammoth found in North America. A lot of its skin and hair was still intact. As an Ice Age paleontologist, it had been one of my lifelong dreams to come face to face with a real woolly mammoth, said Grant Zazula, a paleontologist with the Yukon government, going on to describe the mammoth as, quote, "one of the most incredible mummified Ice Age animals ever discovered in the world." The discovery happened when a mine worker hit something unexpected while digging. The team stopped all their work and brought in geologists who managed to recover the mammoth's remains, and just in time because a storm had been rolling in. Analysis suggested that the mammoth may have died after getting trapped in mud while grazing, with grass found in her stomach. In 2018, yet another incredible discovery was made in Siberia. The nearly perfectly preserved mummified remains of an Ice Age horse, believed to have died between 30,000 and 40,000 years ago. Its body was so well preserved that even tiny details like the hairs in its nostrils and around its hooves were still visible. The foal was found deep in a crater, about 328 feet or 100 meters deep, during an expedition in Yakutia. It was around 2 months old when it died. The mummified body was almost entirely intact, with no visible damage. Scientists collected samples from the foal's hair and tissue and found it belonged to an extinct species known as the Lena horse, which was genetically distinct from the wild horses that still roam the area today. This species lived in Siberia tens of thousands of years ago and disappeared long before modern horses evolved. In 2016, biologist Steve Emsley was in southern Antarctica when he came across something kind of confusing. It looked to be a recently abandoned Adelie penguin colony. There were mummified chicks, guano stains, pebbles from nests, but the thing is, Adelie penguins hadn't been spotted in the region for centuries. What Emsley soon discovered was that the penguin remains were far older than anyone could have imagined. Radiocarbon dating of the bones, eggshells, and mummified skin showed that these penguins had been dead for thousands of years. The rapidly melting ice in Antarctica revealed these ancient penguin remains. The penguins had likely settled in the area during warmer periods when the sea ice melted early, allowing the birds to reach the area and build their nests. The most recent colony, which had been buried during the Little Ice Age about 800 years ago, was finally uncovered as the region's ice began to recede. What you're looking at here is a tardigrade, aka a water bear. Now, is this a newly discovered alien species? Well, I wish, but no. These things actually exist right here at home. They're just really, really tiny, which I'm thankful for, because imagine if that alien-looking thing was the size of just even a regular house cat. That would just be horrifying. Tardigrades, nicknamed water bears, are one of the most resilient animals on the planet. They're microscopic animals that are known for their ability to survive in very extreme conditions all over the world. In places like Antarctica, they've been found frozen in ice for thousands of years. And what's amazing about these things is their ability to go into a kind of state of suspended animation. When conditions are harsh, like extreme cold or dryness, tardigrades dry out or freeze and enter a kind of hibernation. And when researchers thaw them out, they can come back to life. Water bears have even survived space travel in this dormant state. This makes them one of the toughest known organisms in the world. In March of 2011, Sean Funk, a shovel operator at a mine in Fort McMurray, Alberta, was digging when he made an amazing discovery. A discovery that turned out to be Alberta's oldest dinosaur fossil and one of the best preserved ever found in the entire world. Honestly, this has to be the most amazing dinosaur discovery that I've ever read about. And I think Don Henderson, curator of dinosaurs at the Royal Tyrrell Museum, agrees, saying at the time, "Right away we knew it was going to be something good, but we had no idea how good it was going to be." So after getting the fossil back to the museum, Don and his team got to work, and 6 years later the dinosaur was named Boreal Pelta markmicheli. The name Boreal Pelta means shield of the north, and the species name honors Mark Mitchell, the museum technician who spent over 7,000 grueling hours removing the dinosaur from rock. Now, I'm not done with this one. There's just too much to talk about with this discovery to cram it into one point. So as I said, the Boreal Pelta was incredibly well preserved. It was covered in thick armor, especially around its neck. It also had these massive 20-inch spikes at the shoulders that were assumed to be for fighting, but Victoria Arbour, a curator of paleontology, also thought they might have been a display of health and strength, similar to the horns of a bull or tusks of an elephant. Now here's what's utterly crazy to me though. This dinosaur was so intact, they were able to see what was in its stomach. There were twigs and ferns in there, suggesting it ate during the wet season. Scientists think it could have been swept away by a flash flood, eventually sinking to the bottom of the sea. The body would have flipped over and sank, with its thick back and bloated belly causing it to be preserved in sediment, creating a natural time capsule that kept it safe for 110 million years. Here's another crazy thing about this find though. They were even able to determine, to a certain degree, what color the creature was. Most of the fossil was covered in relatively well-preserved skin, and from this, they were able to study pigment cells called melanosomes. Melanosomes are seen in nature all the time. It's what gives many modern-day animals unique markings like spots and stripes. It's rare to see melanosomes in fossils, but again, Boreal Pelta was especially well preserved. At least one component of Boreal Pelta's color was this reddish brown, said Caleb Brown from the Royal Tyrrell Museum. The color on its back may have been part of a camouflage pattern called countershading, helping it blend into its environment and avoid predators. Now also in 2011, a team of paleontologists led by William Hammond discovered a new species of ancient dinosaur in the frozen mountains of Antarctica, an area that's usually thought of as one of the coldest places on Earth, but of course millions of years ago it was much warmer. The dinosaur was small, around 4 to 5 feet long, and had bird-like hip bones. It was likely related to early plant eaters like the Ferbosaur and Heterodontosaur, which were the ancestors of larger and more famous dinos like Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurus. The fossils were found on Mount Kirkpatrick, part of the central transatlantic mountains. Hammer and his team uncovered a leg and foot, but they weren't sure if they had found the dinosaur's head. It would take about a year to fully understand what they'd found. Thomas Holtz, a geology professor at the University of Maryland, noted that the find could help fill gaps in both dinosaur evolution and the ancient Antarctic environment, saying that this discovery was from a time when dinosaurs were just starting to take over, comparing these early small plant eaters to rabbits, fast, common, and without armor, but important to the overall evolution of the giant plant eaters that came later. Finding fossils in Antarctica is extremely challenging because of the harsh conditions and short research window. Hammer had been trying to return to the site since 1990, but bad weather and helicopter problems cut short his 2003 trip. As Holtz put it, anytime we find fossils there, it's a brand new species. It's practically unexplored territory. So these weren't the only dino remains William Hammer discovered in the mountains of Antarctica. In 1990, he and his team discovered a 22-foot meat-eating dinosaur called Cryolophosaurus. This was a big deal because it was the first dinosaur ever found in Antarctica. Cryolophosaurus was a meat-eating dinosaur that lived around 190 million years ago during the early Jurassic period. It was about 20 to 23 feet long, 6 to 7 meters, and weighed roughly 1,000 pounds. What really sets this dinosaur apart was its unique crest. The crest, found on the top of its head, had a very unusual shape, kind of like a frozen backwards mohawk. There are like two kind of things here. It's believed that the crest could have been used for display, either to attract mates or to communicate with other members of its species. As Hammer put it, it looked like a frozen crested reptile, which is how they got the name Cryolophosaurus, meaning frozen crested lizard. And again, in the early 1990s, William Hammer of Augustana College discovered more incredible fossils on Mount Kirkpatrick. These particular fossils included parts of a foot, leg, and ankle bones from a long-necked dinosaur that lived around 190 million years ago. It wasn't until much later, though, that the fossil was identified. The fossils were painstakingly removed from the ice and rock using jackhammers, rock saws, and chisels under extremely difficult conditions, said Nathan Smith, a graduate student at the Field Museum in Chicago. After a lot of hard work, Smith and paleontologist Diego Pohl realized they'd found a new species of dinosaur, which they named Glacialosaurus hammeri. This dinosaur was about 20 to 25 feet long and would have weighed between 4 to 6 tons. It belonged to a group called sauropodomorphs, which includes some of the largest dinosaurs ever. Think of those massive-sized, long-necked plant eaters. In Canada's Yukon, scientists have made some pretty amazing discoveries. Woolly mammoth and bison perfectly preserved in permafrost. Just like in Siberia, the icy ground here keeps animals' remains in pretty amazing condition. The preservation gives researchers this rare look at how these animals lived during the Ice Age. But it's not just mammoths and bison that have been found. The permafrost has also preserved prehistoric plants, insects, and parasites. The fact that these remains are so well preserved gives clues about what these creatures ate, how they behaved. For example, researchers can examine the mammoth's teeth and stomach contents to learn more about what they ate. In Egypt's Sahara Desert, there's a place called the Cave of Swimmers, famous for its ancient paintings. What's weird is a bunch of these images show what looks a lot like people swimming, which is strange because the Sahara is of course this dry, arid desert now, but it wasn't always that way. The paintings are believed to be about 10,000 years old, long before the Sahara became the desert that we know today. Back then, the area was much greener, with lakes, rivers, and plenty of plants, so plenty of wildlife could have lived there, including humans. The Cave of Swimmers tells us the Sahara's climate used to be much wetter, and it's kind of the bridge between the lush stretch of land it used to be and the desert we see now. The early humans who painted in these caves were likely some of the first to adapt to the changing environment. It's possible They may have even seen how things were changing and wanted to document their daily lives, leave something behind so that future generations would know what it was like before. But that's just my theory. In 2002, scientists made an incredible discovery at Blombos Cave in South Africa. They found some of the oldest known artwork in the world, pieces of ochre carved with intricate patterns that were around 75,000 years old. That is a very long time ago. So long ago that it completely changed our understanding of when humans first started to show signs of more modern behavior, like creating art. Along with the carvings, the cave also showed evidence of early tools and jewelry, objects that hint at this much more sophisticated, complex culture than we would have pictured for the time. Turns out, these early humans were capable of symbolic thinking. They were forming social structures and using creativity in ways we just hadn't expected. Basically, we thought that they were just really dumb. The extinction of Ice Age animals like mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths has always been a tricky topic. Some scientists think humans hunted these animals to extinction. Others say climate change is to blame, but recent discoveries are giving us a more clear picture. In 2020, a study of Ice Age bones showed that the megafauna were wiped out by this mix of human hunting and drastic climate changes. The animals were already struggling because the climate was warming when humans started hunting them, and that combination led to their disappearance in North America and Europe. But the extinction might not have happened all at once. In some places, animals like mammoths stuck around longer than we thought. Some even survived until about 4,000 years ago. For centuries, the native Paiute people of Nevada told stories of giant, pale-skinned invaders called the Sitka. These giants were said to be fierce, red-headed warriors who arrived in the region thousands of years before, attacking local tribes. The legend says that the tribes eventually teamed up, chased the giants into a cave, and wiped them out. These stories seemed like mere myth until bones started turning up in Lovelock Cave. In 1911, two miners discovered what looked like huge human skeletons in the cave. Some of these skeletons were reportedly between 7 and 8 feet tall. More excavations in 1912 and 1924 unearthed thousands of artifacts, including a giant sandal measuring 15 inches long, which seemed to support the idea that something unusual had happened there. But that wasn't all. A large handprint embedded in the cave's rock was also found, and it was about twice the size of an average human hand. And then in 1931, the Nevada Review miner reported the discovery of 2 mummified skeletons in a dry lake bed near Lovelock, allegedly measuring between 8.5 and 10 feet tall, covered in red hair.
Our first discovery takes us straight to one of the most iconic creatures of the Ice Age, the woolly mammoth. Scattered across Siberia's permafrost, nearly complete carcasses have been uncovered, offering an unparalleled glimpse into a prehistoric world. These aren't just piles of bones. Many specimens still carry clumps of shaggy hair, remnants of skin, and even traces of blood. Scientists have been able to extract genetic materials from these remains, sparking debates about the possibility of de-extinction and cloning. Beyond their sheer size and grandeur, these mammoths also carry clues about their diets and the ecosystems they roamed. Detailed tissue analysis have revealed microbial communities that once thrived inside of these giants, providing unexpected insights into the complex interplay between Ice Age megafauna and their environment. Every frozen mammoth found in Siberia is like a time capsule, inviting us to piece together the puzzle of life in a world long past. Next up is one of the most hair-raising discoveries, a 30,000-year-old virus revived from Siberian permafrost. Dubbed Pithovirus sibericum, this giant virus is one of the largest ever found, and its revival in a controlled laboratory setting stunned scientists worldwide. Unlike most viruses that are quickly degraded by time, Pithovirus lay dormant, perfectly preserved in ice. Its reawakening not only highlights the incredible resilience of viral particles, but also raises some important questions about the risks of ancient pathogens re-emerging as global temperatures rise. Researchers are studying its structure and genetic makeup to understand how viruses evolve over millennia. While there's no immediate danger to modern life, the discovery underscores the delicate balance between nature's hidden past and the challenges of our changing climate. Siberia's permafrost isn't just a graveyard for large creatures, it's also a sanctuary for tiny, resilient bacteria. Scientists have isolated bacterial strains that have been dormant for tens of thousands of years, reviving them in laboratory experiments. One such strain belongs to a group of bacillus species known for their extraordinary survival skills in extreme conditions. These microbes have adapted in a way that allow them to withstand not only freezing temperatures, but also high radiation and low nutrient levels. The genetic makeup of these ancient bacteria is revealing unexpected adaptations, mechanisms that could inspire new biotechnological applications, from novel antibiotics to enzymes that function under harsh industrial conditions. Such discoveries provide a fascinating look at the resilience of life and the possibility that even the simplest organisms can thrive in the most unforgiving environments. Their story is a testament to nature's ingenuity and the enduring legacy of life through the ages. Deep beneath the Siberian surface lie ice cores that are nothing short of climate history books. These long cylindrical samples of ice have trapped layers of air, dust, and even volcanic ash from thousands of years ago. By analyzing these tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere, scientists can reconstruct the Earth's climate history in astonishing detail. These ice cores reveal shifts in greenhouse gas concentrations, temperature fluctuations, and even clues about past solar activity. For instance, layers enriched with volcanic ash hint at massive eruptions that temporarily cooled the planet, while varying gas compositions tell stories of natural climate cycles. Beyond their importance for understanding global warming, these records provide a baseline against which we can measure human impact on today's climate. Each layer in an ice core is like a page in Earth's diary, a narrative that not only informs us about the distant past, but also guides our predictions for the future. It's kind of like a perfect blend of history, science, and a little bit of detective work hidden in the ice. Siberia's frozen expanses aren't just a repository for terrestrial relics, they are also a treasure trove of space rocks. The continent's harsh climate means that meteorites, which might otherwise weather away in warmer regions, remain pristinely preserved in ice. Over the decades, meteorite hunters and scientists have uncovered fragments that offer invaluable clues about the early solar system. One particularly intriguing meteorite revealed unusual isotopic compositions, sparking fresh theories about how our solar system formed and evolved. These cosmic visitors are like natural laboratories, each carrying the chemical signatures of processes that predate even the Earth itself. Their study not only helps us understand the building blocks of our planet, but also inform us about the wider universe.
Around 20,000 years ago, a young woolly rhinoceros was going about its day in what's now northern Siberia. It was probably foraging for food when it made an oopsie and drowned in a river. Fast forward to 2020, and that same woolly rhino became a huge discovery for scientists. As rising temperatures cause permafrost to melt, creatures like this long extinct rhino are being uncovered, giving researchers a glimpse into prehistoric times. Permafrost is a layer of soil that's been frozen for thousands of years, great for preserving ancient remains. The woolly rhino's carcass was found by a local farmer in Yakutia, Siberia, about 15,000 years after the species went extinct. The fossil was incredibly well preserved, with its fur, hooves, and internal organs still intact. But what made this discovery even more special was the rhino's horn, which is rarely found in such good condition because cartilage usually decomposes relatively quickly. In 2018, a local man named Pavel Efimov made an incredible discovery in Siberia: the severed head of a giant wolf perfectly preserved beneath the permafrost. But this wolf was nearly 40,000 years old. It wasn't until 2019 that researchers started studying it in detail. The big question they were trying to answer was whether the wolf's head had been chopped off by humans or separated by ice. The cut on the wolf's neck wasn't what you'd expect from ice separation. It was rougher, less smooth, meaning it might have been made by something like a tool. The severed head is quite large, measuring about 40 centimeters, much bigger than the typical 25 centimeter head of a modern Siberian wolf. It had a thick mammoth-like coat, sharp fangs, and some parts of its skull seemed more developed than today's wolves. In 2016, ornithologist Stephen Emsley made a surprising find during a research trip in Antarctica. He stumbled on ancient penguin remains at Cape Urzar near the Ross Sea, and what he discovered there was unlike anything he'd seen before. Now, at first, Emsley was researching ancient penguin remains at the site, following a lead about penguin droppings. He didn't expect to find much, since explorers like Robert Falcon Scott and Ernest Shackleton hadn't recorded any penguin sightings in the area. But when Emsley arrived, he found something unexpected: white splotchy guano stains and loose chick bones, which usually indicate that a penguin colony had recently occupied the site, but that wasn't the case. Investigating further, he found complete penguin chick carcasses and even intact mummies. The site must have been covered by snow and ice soon after the colony was last abandoned, preserving the surface remains for centuries, Emsley went on to write. The site had been used by penguins at different times in the past, with carbon dating showing it was occupied 3 times starting around 5,000 years ago. The site's location and the penguins' repeated visits were likely because of changing ice conditions, which would open and close the coast to the penguins. Emsley believes that this area could potentially see penguins returning in the future as climate change melts the sea ice earlier each summer, giving them access to the coast again. In 2018, some fossil ivory hunters in northeastern Siberia made a pretty cool discovery. While digging into the permafrost, they unearthed the carcass of a bird, but this bird was a 46,000-year-old specimen, perfectly frozen in time. The discovery was sent to paleontologist Love Dallin and a team of researchers at the Swedish Museum of Natural History. The bird is believed to be an ancestor of the horned lark, which is found in places like northern Russia and Mongolia today. It's a cool find though, the first bird of its kind ever to be discovered. The fact that the bird was almost completely intact made it one of the best preserved ancient animals ever found. The bird was found near Balaya Gora, a village in Yakutia, an area known as the Pole of Cold because of its extremely cold winters, sometimes reaching as low as -60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly -50 degrees Celsius. That is just too cold. The researchers think that the end of the last ice age led to the formation of a new subspecies of animals like this bird. The discovery adds to a list of well-preserved creatures found in the same area, like a 42,000-year-old foal and an 18,000-year-old puppy, both of which I've talked about in previous videos.
Picture skiing through fresh powder and suddenly spotting 2 perfectly dressed soldiers staring back at you, faces intact, eyes still blue 100 years after they died. In 2012, Italian glacier workers clearing snow near the Presena summit unearthed 2 Austrian infantrymen from World War I's high-altitude White War. Their wool uniforms still buttoned at the collar, leather boots were supple enough to lace, and handwritten letters inside their pockets were still legible. These 2 had likely succumbed to an avalanche in 1918, instantly cryopreserved. Today, their remains rest in a museum, a chilling reminder that battlefields can hide in plain sight for a century when the battlefield is a glacier. 75 years after vanishing on a routine errand, a Swiss couple reappeared, still holding each other like they'd never let go. In 1942, dairy farmers Marceline and Francine Dumoulin left home to milk their cows and never returned. Families assumed they'd fallen into a crevasse, but hope lingered. In 2017, a ski lift technician on a glacier noticed 2 bodies emerging side by side. DNA confirmed it was the couple. Their clothes, ration cards, and even a pocket pocket watch were intact. The couple's surviving children, now grandparents, finally found closure, though seeing mom and dad encased in ice after 3/4 of a century was as heartbreaking as it is disturbing. You're alone on a glacier when a small metal tin pokes through the snow. Inside is enough emeralds and sapphires to buy the mountain you're standing on. In 2013, a young climber crossing a glacier in France kicked up a rusty box. Up popped roughly 100 glittering gems worth over $200,000. They'd flown through the air in 1966 when Air India Flight 101 slammed into Mont Blanc. Instead of pocketing the payday and vanishing, the climber actually turned the treasure over to the police. Decades later, Indian authorities traced the jewels to passenger manifests, demonstrating that even lost riches can resurface once the ice lets go. Imagine discovering a World War II era aircraft breaking through the snow like a giant aluminum fossil, propellers still frozen mid-spin. In November 1946, a US Air Force C-53 Skytrooper crashed high in Switzerland's Gauley Glacier. Miraculously, all 12 people aboard were rescued in what became a landmark alpine air rescue. The wreck itself, however, was swallowed by the glacier until recently. Warming summers now exposed twisted fuselage panels and oxygen tanks that look freshly dented. Local officials periodically collect debris, but every spring the glacier opens a little wider, revealing more of a machine that history books said was long gone. Hikers on a popular Alaskan route step over wings, cockpit glass, and sometimes unexploded ordnance without realizing they are on a Cold War crash site. The TB-29 Superfortress went down in 1957 during a training flight, scattering across the Nick Glacier. 6 crew members died instantly. Recovery teams removed the bodies but left most of the aircraft. 60+ years later, chunks of the bomber still pepper the ice. Metal fatigue cracks revealed jagged cross-sections, and live bombs are rumored, though never confirmed, to be buried even deeper. The wreck is a backcountry landmark nicknamed Bomber Glacier, a stunning yet sobering reminder that our playgrounds can double as graveyards. Hidden within the icy tombs of the Altai Mountains lies one of Siberia's most enchanting archaeological finds, the Ice Maiden. This remarkably preserved mummy, discovered among the burial mounds of the ancient Pazyryk culture, offers an intimate look at a lost world. The Ice Maiden's delicate tattoos, intricately embroidered clothing, and ornate jewelry provide a window into the spiritual and daily life of these nomadic peoples. Her burial site, complete with ceremonial artifacts, suggests that she held a significant position within her community. The precision of her preservation has allowed scientists to study not just her physical attributes, but also the materials and techniques used in her adornments, sparking debates about trade routes and cultural exchanges in the ancient world. The Ice Maiden is definitely more than a frozen body. It's like a storyteller whose silent whispers continue to intrigue historians and archaeologists, revealing the artistry and sophistication of a people long forgotten. Among the icy relics of Siberia are seeds that have withstood the test of time. Literally. Preserved in permafrost for thousands of years, these seeds have occasionally shown the ability to germinate under the right conditions. Scientists are fascinated by these natural time capsules as they hold the genetic blueprints of ancient plant species that once thrived in a very different world. By comparing these ancient seeds with their modern descendants, researchers can trace evolutionary changes and shifts in plant biodiversity over millennia. In controlled experiments, some of these seeds have sprouted, offering a rare opportunity to study traits that might have been lost over time. These findings not only provide insights into the resilience of life, but also raise intriguing questions about de-extinction and biodiversity conservation. In the frozen depths of Siberia, every seed is a whisper from the past, a living relic that connects us to ecosystems long vanished, yet still influential in today's world. Not Not all the frozen giants of Siberia were herbivores. Among the finds are the formidable remains of cave lions, the apex predators of the Ice Age. These predators, whose fossils have been remarkably well preserved in permafrost, offer critical insights into the evolution and adaptations of large carnivores. Detailed studies of their bones reveal specialized features, robust jaw structures, powerful limbs, and unique skull formations that hint at their hunting strategies and social behavior. Cave lions roamed vast territories, and their remains help scientists piece together the ecological dynamics of ancient predator-prey relationships. Beyond their role in the food chain, these fossils also allow researchers to explore genetic links between extinct species and their modern relatives, deepening our understanding of evolutionary biology. Every bone and claw encased in Siberian ice is a fragment of a larger story about survival, adaptation, and the relentless march of time in one of Earth's most extreme environments. While the giants of the Ice Age often steal the spotlight, the tiniest creatures can be just as revealing. Deep in the Siberian ice, scientists have uncovered an array of insect fossils, delicate remnants that offer a window into ancient ecosystems. These fossils include remarkably detailed impressions of wings, exoskeletons, and even some internal structures that are rarely preserved elsewhere. Studying these minute fossils helps researchers understand how insect populations responded to dramatic climate shifts, providing clues about biodiversity and ecological resilience. Some of these insect remains date back tens of thousands of years, capturing evolutionary snapshots of species that once played crucial roles in pollination and the food chain. Despite their small size, these frozen insects are powerful storytellers. They remind us that even the most inconspicuous organisms can hold the keys to understanding our planet's dynamic past, and they challenge us to consider how life, in all of its varied forms, adapts and survives through the ages. Beyond the realms of biology and climate, Siberian ice has also preserved mysterious man-made artifacts that continue to puzzle historians. In various excavations, researchers have discovered tools, ornaments, and even fragments of what appear to be ceremonial objects, all embedded in the permafrost. These artifacts, some intricately crafted from metal and stone, offer clues about ancient human cultures and their technological prowess. Their design and craftsmanship often defy easy explanation, hinting at trade networks, cultural exchanges, and the deep-seated understanding of the natural world that we are only beginning to comprehend. Each object serves as a tangible link to human ingenuity, a snapshot of time when early inhabitants braved harsh climates with resourcefulness and creativity.